So welcome everybody. Great to have all of you here with us this evening. As the title indicates on the slide, what we'll be looking at today is funding your Master of Contemporary Education Studies. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be speaking a little bit about some of the opportunities that are available via academyEX. And then we'll also speak a little bit about some of the opportunities that are available via the TeachNZ organization. But before we do that, we'll begin with the karakia as we always do. Karakia whakataki, ko te kawa o runga, ko te kawa o raro, ko te kawa ora, ko te kawa ora, e rongo whakiiria ki runga, turu turu o whiti, whakamaua ki a tina, tina uie taiki. Right. So just very quickly, good point at right here to actually introduce ourselves. So my name is Herbert Thomas. I'm the program lead for the Master of Contemporary Education. And I'll just get my colleagues to introduce themselves very quickly. Maybe Lauren, if you'd like to go first.
Hi, everybody. Welcome this evening. My name is Lauren, and I am Head of Growth here at academyEX. I'm going to hand over to Lisa.
Thanks.
Kia ora. I'm Lisa. I'm the Growth and Relations lead. I'm here to help you all to, if you have any questions with the program, and support you through any funding questions as well.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Lisa. In fact, what we will do is I will actually ask Lisa to jump in right at the beginning, because she's going to be telling us a little bit more about some of the mechanisms that you can use to fund your masters from academyEX side. So Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, Herbert. As well as focusing on the TeachNZ scholarship application, we have a raft of different areas we can support you through with your funding for your study. For domestic students, there is StudyLink. We have a range of academyEX scholarships that are 50% of the fees. There's Tangata Whenua, Pacific Arco, Taipeki over 60, and Impact for the intent to do good for the world, people, the planet. We see educators as servant leaders, so you're definitely one of, at least one of those scholarships, because Impact's the intent to do good. There's the opportunity to get the early bird discount if you apply early enough. Herbert will be taking you through the TeachNZ application. We have templates that you can use to approach your school, your kahuiako, or any groups or associations you're part of for support. They articulate the why, and that the main focus of the Masters is a change project of your choice. So it could be your work focus, your passion, it's up to you. We'll walk alongside you to get that thing done. So very, very practical. The benefit to the student, the school, the community go far and wide. We also, I've got a list of external places you can approach for funding. And please note, our invoices are, the Masters is in 3 parts and you're charged per part. So the invoices are sent 2 weeks prior to the start of the part. If you could, so that takes you through the academyEX scholarships for domestic students. To apply for the scholarship, you need to first apply to enroll, and equally apply for a scholarship with academyEX. And that slide shows you how your scholarship application, speak to your why and what you hope to achieve from doing the program, and a little bit about you. The questionnaire guides you through the questions. You've got a word limit of, I think, 200 per box, but equally you can do a video if you prefer. So scholarship applications close a month before the intake. So if you're looking at January intake next year, you're looking in December, a month out prior, if that helps.
Thank you.
I think we'll go to slide 9.
Next one. Thank you. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Lisa. That's just a quick overview of some of the ways in which academyEX can actually support you. I'm going to focus more on the TeachNZ study awards, etc. So one thing I want to say up front, please, is please be aware of the fact that these awards are only available for domestic students. They're not for international students, unfortunately. So where you begin, quite simply, is you need to have an ESL number, which is a sort of a education logon that you require to be able to access services from the government. So if you have an ESL role, or log on as they call it, then you can actually log on, and that gives you access to the application process, etc. So one thing you should do up front, I think, is you'll notice there's a URL on the slide. If you click on the URL, it will take you to the ESL site. Please remember that you'll have access to these slides after the session, so you'll be able to go through the slides again and click on the links, etc., etc. So that's the first thing to do, is to ensure that you have an ESL role. If you don't have an ESL role, please contact the person at your school who is delegated to actually help you set up one. And then you ensure that you have that set up so that you can access the application process, etc. So that's the first step in terms of looking at the study awards. Okay, so I guess one of the questions that's probably at the forefront of your mind right now is, how are these TeachNZ applications assessed? What do they look at? So there's some very clear sort of guidelines. The first thing is TeachNZ looks very specifically at students who are completing a level 9 Bachelor of Education qualification, or they're undertaking research study that further contributes to the Ministry of Education's priorities, etc. And those priorities are Maori and Pacific students, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, students with learning support needs. The other area that's not included here, but that they certainly do look at, is whether you are in the process of completing a qualification. So, for example, let's say you've completed part 1 of the MCE, you've completed part 2, and now you are looking for a TeachNZ study award for part 3. That's something they would consider quite favorably as well. So the completion of an area of study is something that they certainly look at as well. And then once they've looked at all of those, of course, they also look at your application from the perspective of 4 important factors: the completeness and clarity of the application, obviously, the benefits to you, your students, your community, your school, the issues you face because of distance or professional isolation. What we mean by that, quite simply, is there are many teachers out there who don't have easy access to a tertiary education institution. And so they're more likely to fund you if you are in that kind of situation, for example. The commitment and effort you've already made in terms of recent study. So for those of you who've actually completed the DCL or part 1 of the MCE in the last 3 years, obviously that counts in your favor. If you haven't completed it in the last 3 years, you can still say, I've completed part 1, and so I'd now like to move to part 2 or 3. or 2 and 3. So that's something that counts in your favor as well. The selection panel's role is to ensure that the process is open, fair, consistent, impartial, provides for equal opportunity and non-discrimination, and that study leave weeks are assigned equitably. So we'll say a little bit more about study leave weeks a bit later on. What I suggest you do is I'm going to go through a whole number of things now, and at the end of this presentation, we'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions. However, if at any time during the presentation you have a burning question, you can't wait, please feel free to ask. We'll answer it as best we can. Okay, so there are 3 kinds of awards, if you like. And I'd just like to point those out very quickly. We speak about TeachNZ study awards, there are sabbaticals, and there are study grants, and they are quite different things actually. So a study award enables teachers and principals to complete part-time or full-time study in an educational priority area. So that's what most people go for, is the study award. The sabbaticals are so the teachers and principals have an opportunity to spend 3, 5, or 10 weeks completing a professional learning activity. The study support grants to secondary and area school teachers so they can undertake study and or research while continuing to teach. So in terms of the study awards, the kind of award that a lot of people do get is an award that enables you to study full-time. The length of that award is in best case scenario going to be 32 weeks. The sabbaticals generally peak at around 10 weeks. So in other words, if you apply for a sabbatical, you'll have 10 weeks off to conduct research, study, whatever the case might be. And then the study support grants equate to roughly 4 hours per week. So you'll have that funded for you to engage in research or study or whatever the case might be. So should be pretty obvious to you that the study awards are the ones that most people go for because it gives you 32 weeks off. It's a nice big block. You can get a lot of learning done during that time. So what Lisa has done very well here, I think, is capture the awards that are available, and very importantly, when the applications open and when the applications close for each of those awards. So the ones that we have most often, questions asked us most often about, are the Primary Teacher Study Award, the Area School Teachers Study Award, and then the Secondary School Teacher Study Award. But of course, as you can see, there are others as well that you can apply for. There's a Secondary Senior Manager Sabbatical. There's Kindergarten. I'm not going to go through all of those today. There are just too many of them. You'll see there's a link at the bottom of the slide that will take you to the web page that actually explains all of these in a lot of detail. So once you get the slides, you can click on the link at the bottom and you can look at these in a lot more detail. I would like to point out, however, that notice the Primary Teacher Study Award and the Secondary Teacher Study Award are all closing on the 31st of May this year. So for those of you who are applying for either one of those, and quite frankly, those are the ones that are most often applied for, you will need to have your application submitted by the end of May. Just be aware of that. Okay, so we'll move along. So what are the kind of eligibility sort of issues that you need to be thinking about in terms of these awards? Well, let's take as an example the Primary Study Award, which is probably the one that gets applied for most often on our program. So quite simply, you need to hold a full and current practicing certificate, not strange. You need to be a full-time or part-time teacher or principal employed in a state or state-integrated New Zealand school. You need to have the support of your principal and board of trustees or your employer. You need to be employed under PTCA or PPCA or applicable individual employment agreement. You have at least 3 years experience as a fully certified teacher in New Zealand state or state-integrated school. And you should not have received the TeachNZ Study Award in the last 5 years. So if you've received it in the last 5 years, unfortunately, you'll have to wait until your 5-year period is up. And then the last point there is also quite important. You cannot undertake a study award at the same time as being appointed to a Kohiako, community teacher. I know that one's very interesting because Kohiako are very soon going to disappear in some schools. I'm sure in many schools they'll continue. But something to bear in mind in terms of availability. Now, if you compare that to the secondary study awards, you'll see they're almost identical. The eligibility criteria are virtually the same, right? The only difference, of course, obviously, is that in this case, you need to be employed under the Secondary Teachers Collective Agreement, etc. Other than that, very much the same eligibility. Right, so what I thought I'd do is I'm going to pick up now on some of the aspects of the application process that I know are there. Unfortunately, because I don't have an ESL logon, I can't actually access the application forms themselves, but I do know the questions that they ask you on the application form. So what I've documented on this slide is quite simply the structure of the MCE, program, right? And what I've done here is I've just divided it into 3 sections. So for those of you who have already completed DCL or Part 1, you'll notice that Part 1 consists of 2 courses, the DCL 8001 and the DCL 8002. And so very importantly, the reason why I've included all of this information on the slide is because there's actually a question on the application form where they ask you to document the courses for which you are actually applying. And so what I've included in each block is I've included the course code, DCLC 8001. I've included the name of the course, Digital Collaborative Learning and Leadership. And in brackets, I've included the number of credits for that particular course. So in other words, if you are applying for entry into Part 1 or the DCL, then you would use the DCL course codes. If you're applying for entry into Parts 2 and 3, then you would use the Part 2 and Part 3 course codes. Now, let me explain how it works. So Part 1, both courses are compulsory. So if you follow Part 1, you enroll in both of those courses. Part 2, both courses are compulsory. But in Part 3, some people have the option of doing either a 90-credit practice-based change project, or they do a 45-credit practice-based project plus 3 electives. Now, if you join us as part of, for example, the January 2026 full-time intake, then you are very likely to be doing the 90-credit project. So for you, Part 3 will be MLED 9290 Practice-Based Change Project, in brackets, 90 credits. I'll recap very briefly. Let's say you are applying to follow the whole of the MCE. Let's say you're following the whole of the MCE program, that's what you're applying for. You would then include the first 2 courses, or the only 2 courses in Part 1, both 8001, 8002. In Part 2, you'd be following 8201, 8205. And in Part 3, you'd be following 9290. Okay. Hopefully that is fairly clear. So you might ask me now, well, what do all of these things mean? Let me translate them to you, for you in plain English. So Part 1 focuses very strongly on an introduction to particularly digital and collaborative learning, but also an introduction to leadership, which is a very important part of the whole program. And we also introduce you to the concept of conducting research in education. So that's the focus area of Part 1. Part 2 focuses firstly on contemporary issues in education and in teaching. And that's a very wide range of those, all the way from AI to culture sponsor practice to various new pedagogical approaches, etc., etc. And 8205 focuses on the development of a project plan for your project in Part 3. It also takes you through an ethics process where you complete ethics documentation. At the end of Part 2, once those ethics forms have been accepted and approved by the ethics panel, you then are allowed to begin with your project in part 3. You implement a practice-based project in your context, in your school, your classroom, if you like. You choose what the project is, absolutely your choice. We're there to advise you and help you and support you, but that's very much yours. So you plan it, you implement it, you lead it, you evaluate it, and at the symposium at the end of part 3, you present your findings to the audience at large, but also to a panel of graders and moderators. So that, in a nutshell, is pretty much what it looks like. Okay, right. So what I'll do now is absolutely horrible. Sorry, I've got too many things open at the moment. There we go. Hopefully, there we go. Right. Okay. So that was there. So one thing that you definitely need to be aware of is the national education and learning priorities. And the reason for that is, and I've added a link to the slide to that particular site. It's a document. Many of you will know it already, I'm quite sure. But what the document does is it spells out from the Ministry of Education's perspective what the priorities are in terms of education and learning in New Zealand. And you need to use that document when you actually complete your application form. So what you want to do is you want to ensure in your application that you reflect the particular language they use in that document. So when they speak about particular objectives, you want to be able to refer to those objectives in your description of the project, etc. So what I'd advise you to do is have a look at the NELP document, as it's known, National Education Learning Priorities. Look at the document, look at the objectives, and use some of that language in your application form. So, for example, part of what you'll be asked to do is to describe your project, potentially, that you want to implement in part 3. Now, obviously, you won't know yet what that project is, but you might have some vague idea, right? So the way in which you answer that question is you say, this is what I believe the project will be at the moment, according to the knowledge that I now have. But then you also indicate that the project focus will be refined during your MCE studies. So during the course of part 2, you'll be engaged in those 2 courses. And of course, your ideas about the project will change, will morph, will refine, etc. So that's hopefully useful. Right. Now, when it comes to the purpose of your project, this is what they ask you to do in terms of the purpose. They'll say, sorry, before I carry on, can everybody see my screen?
No, Herbert, it's stuck on the course.
Okay, that's what I was wondering about. Okay, I'll go back. Sorry, apologies for that. I just saw it flash up now. Hopefully you can see the screen now. I'll just go back a slide. Where did I lose you?
You showed part 1, 2, and 3. That was the last slide.
Right. Okay. So this is what I was speaking about when I spoke about the national education and learning priorities. That's this slide, right? So you'll see there's a link to that document on the slide. I advise you very strongly to look at the document, look at the language they use in the objectives, ensure that you use some of that language in your application form. For example, when you're describing your project, use some of the language that they use in that document. The point is, of course, when you choose your project, see whether you can align your project with some of the key objectives that are included in the NELP document. That makes it, of course, far more compelling from the funder's perspective. Right. So this is one of the question or the statements that they make. So in terms of your proposed study, they ask you to do the following. Describe how your proposed study meets the purpose of the study support grant. Now, if we think about what the purpose of that is, remember I said to you, either you could be looking, for example, at the priority areas identified by the government. For example, the performance of Mauryan Pacific students, that might be a focus of your project. Alternately, the focus of your project might be that you are trying to support students who are situated in a fairly small rural school, don't have many opportunities to sort of operate beyond the particular school, etc. Or it could also be that your project focuses on things such as technology, which has never been used in the school, for example, something like that. So what you want to do when you think about the project you're going to be implementing, you want to link your project to some of those purposes that they have for the support grant. But you also want to link it to the NELP document that I was speaking about earlier on, because that NELP document contains the Ministry of Education's priorities for education. So ensure that when you speak about your proposed study, you are linking your study to the purpose of the grant and also to the Ministry of Education priorities. And of course, a very important aspect of that is parity and participation and achievement. That's critical in any school at the moment. So again, some of the ways in which you can do that, I've just made two very small suggestions at the bottom. Point is, you are completing your master's degree. So that's one of the purposes of the award, is to give you the opportunity to complete a degree. So if you've completed part 1 already, you can actually argue that you now would like to complete parts 2 and 3 so that you can finish your master's degree. The implementation of the practice-based change project is a thing you have to mention during your application, because the practice-based change project shows that you're not going to be studying some theoretical matter that has very little to do with reality or practice. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be working in your classrooms predominantly and doing the very things that the government has identified as priorities. So that's a tick for you as well. Practice-based change project is good. And then, of course, a smart thing to do, quite honestly, when you're thinking about your project, would be to identify a challenge or problem in your context that fits with the ministry priority goals, etc. It's unlikely they won't fit, to be very honest with you, because when you look at those priority goals, they cover virtually every aspect that's important in education at the moment. So, in fact, you'll notice quite quickly that virtually any project that you design is likely to speak to those goals. But the important thing is you need to overtly link your project to 1 or 2 or 3 of those goals. Of course, that just means that your application is so much stronger. Study plan. So this is the one I was speaking to you about earlier on when I spoke to you about the course codes and the course names and the course credits. This is what you're going to have to add in there. If your plan includes gaining practical knowledge, undertaking research or other study that's school-related project, provide a brief description here. Again, parts 2 and 3, the focus is practice-based change project. No problem there. Related to a problem or challenge in your context, you need to emphasize that. Deals with contemporary culture responsive pedagogical approaches, great as well. Digital fluency and effective digital technology implementation as a plus. And then also, of course, what we said earlier on in terms of the priority areas that the government has identified. So you want to emphasize these aspects of your study when you speak about that practical knowledge aspect of your project. Okay. Your practice-based change project, by definition, is practical. So you can wax lyrical about that. It's always a good thing. Okay. Right. And I'm just sort of giving you a little bit of information about what the practice-based project is about. It's a capstone course which builds on the outcomes of 2 taught courses in part 2. It'll enable you to demonstrate your capability in leadership and collaboration towards change. You'll use contemporary pedagogical approaches. You'll lead the project. You'll support other candidates in their projects, other people who study with you. There is a requirement that you attend face-to-face sessions and online workshops, so we don't just leave you to your own devices. There is support all the way. And then at the end of the project, once you've completed the project, you present your findings at the symposium, as I indicated earlier on. Okay, so that just gives you a quick overview of what happens with a project. Some of this language you might or might not choose to use in your application. That's up to you. Okay, so now this is a question that will also pop up in your application. What are the benefits of the study for you? Outline the benefits of the study or qualification to you, professionally, your students' learning outcomes, your school, the education sector, and how you might share the learning. So again, yeah, you're going to be referring to a number of different aspects, right? So what does it mean to you personally? So it might be that you are completing a qualification. That's a personal sort of professional thing. In terms of your student learning, well, you wouldn't be implementing the project if you were not trying to improve student learning, because at heart, that's what every single project does. The attempt is to improve your own practice and via your own practice to therefore improve the quality of student learning. And of course, that contributes to student learning, contributes to your school. How does it contribute to the education sector? Again, you can link here to some of those NELP objectives, right? Very important. So there at the bottom, we have some bullet points of things that you might include here. Are you working in a low decile school? Because that, from a funding perspective, is something they find attractive, right? Are you working with priority students, potentially Maori students, Pacific Island students? That's something that they want to develop as well in terms of the quality of that learning. Are you working with neurodivergent students, socioeconomically, well, lower decile, I suppose, and socioeconomic is really the same thing. And then are you working in some of the target areas for the particular study award? And we mentioned some of them, completion of degree, etc., etc. Okay, so when you think about answering this particular question, you want to focus on those things that specifically relate to personal, professional, your own, yourself. How does it inform your students' learning, enhance your students' learning? What's the value for the school? And then, of course, what's the value for the education sector? You've got to hit all of those so that your answer is complete here. Don't pick one. Try to ensure that you include all of those in the answer. It's 250 words, so it's going to take a little bit of thinking and structuring and so forth. So recent study. What recent study have you undertaken? How does it link to this application? Now, for many of you, or some of you, should I say, not for many of you, but for many of the people who come into part 2 of the Masters, they are people who have completed part 1 or the postgrad cert within the last 3 years. And so obviously they quite simply say, well, it's easy. I've completed part 1 of the Masters. I now need to complete parts 2 and 3. Now, whether you've completed DCL within the last 3 years or not doesn't make any difference to application, because the fact of the matter is you've completed 1/3 of a Masters, you need to complete another 2/3. So it's still a valid argument, right? Irrespective of whether you did it last year, 2 years ago, whatever the case might be. But you might also have been involved, for example, in other work. Let's say, for argument's sake, you recently undertook a course in Te Reo, and let's say that the students in your class are predominantly Maori. Then there's a link there, right? So there's a link to your project. So the fact that you've done a Te Reo course means that you are going to be more effective in terms of interacting with Maori students. So think very carefully about any course that you've done recently that could potentially have a positive impact on your proposed study, but also a positive impact on your school and your learning and your students' learning. Right. Personal statement. Okay, so clearly this is something that's going to be unique to you. But what they're looking for here is a statement including how the study helps address any major disadvantages you've experienced because of distance or professional isolation, socioeconomic status, the school or community, or specific requirements of the school. So this is going to very much depend on your own context. Now, I can't tell you how to answer this, but some of the things that people have spoken about in the past in applications like this is, the one that's come up most often is people who work, as I've said earlier on, at rural schools where they are very isolated, they're very far from tertiary education institutions. This particular program, the Master Contemporary Education program, is offered predominantly online. In fact, 90% of it is online. You're only really going to travel to Auckland twice a year. That's it, pretty much. So that's one sort of thing you can say, is you can say that suits me because of the isolation, whatever the case might be. Or you might say things like, look, I'm at a school where we are still very sort of chalk and talk based, and I feel that we need to introduce technology because we believe, you know, obviously that's the way of the future. We can do things more efficiently, more effectively, opens up access to knowledge, information, etc. So that's another argument you could employ, where you could in fact be enrolling in the program to enhance the capability of your school in terms of digital fluency, digital capability, etc. That's another potential argument. So again, the argument here will depend on your specific context and your specific school. Again, try to link your response to some of the government objectives. Can't do any harm, can only do good. Study link. I think, Lisa, this is where you take over, is it?
Thank you, Herbert. I'll just briefly go over that, and I think we need to refer back to the chat, Herbert. Study link is yet another way to fund your masters, to pay them off. Also, please note that we've got a list of external other funding ideas in the templates to approach people, and that you pay per part. So it's not a lump sum you're paying, you'll be charged per part. And my email and my phone number are there. I'm here to help, so please just email me or phone me. I'm here to take you through the process, answer any questions, or even encourage you to apply for a scholarship.
Right. I think you said that there were some questions here. Question, did we need to be enrolled before applying? No, you don't have to. But what you will have to do is, once you have enrolled, you'll have to confirm with them the fact that you have enrolled. So you can actually apply now, no problem. And you can say, these are the courses for which I will be enrolling. They'll get back to you if you qualify. If they accept your application and they decide they're going to give you a study award, then they'll get back to you and they'll say, please provide us with proof of the fact that you have actually enrolled in these courses. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm just scrolling through the chat quickly. Question is, so we don't need to be enrolled into a master's course. We can apply without the course details. No, you have to have the course details. In other words, they will only fund you if you provide them with a recognized course of study. And by that, we mean something like a master's degree or a postgrad diploma or postgrad certificate, whatever the case might be.
Herbert, just hi, Shannon here. Just wanting to know about that period of time in weeks for the part 3 full-time. I know my principal, because I've looked at the whole board support for it, but their key question is, how many weeks are we looking at? So finishing part 2 at the moment.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, but would like to do part 3 full-time. So just wondering about the weeks that would.
That's fine. So the part 3 full-time will run for 25 weeks next year. And of course, part 3 will only happen once everybody's completed part 1, which is 15 weeks into the course. Yeah. So the first so let me go back one step to answer your question properly. So the full-time cohort begins next year in January, on the 20th of January. That particular intake finishes part 3 on the let's get my dates right. The 8th of November, the 8th of November next year. Okay. And so the first 15 weeks will be the part 2 courses, and the next 25 weeks will be part 3. So you'll finish by November. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, decent.
If it happens.
I'm sure it can happen. I'm convinced it can happen. Okay, so somebody's asked a question. I received 32-week study grant 22 to study a course called the following. I applied to the study grant before I enrolled. Yeah, you can do that. The important thing to remember here, I think, is that have a look at the site very carefully. Have a careful study of the site, because one of the requirements also is that they will not give you a new award if you've received an award in the past 5 years. That's quite important to realize. Again, check the site, make sure that you have all of those sort of things sorted out. 2015 DCL, that's where we now, 2025, that's 10 years later, you should be fine. Should be fine. It might be that if you did DCL in 2015, we might ask you to redo one of the courses, because in 2015, for example, the second course in part 2 didn't exist. And so it might well be that if you enroll with us again, we'll ask you to do the second course in part 2, not the first one, and then go into part 3 from there. Okay. I have a question around international students. Very important, please remember the TeachNZ awards we've been speaking about are not for international students. They're for domestic students only. So it's not relevant there. In answer to your question, is there an October 25 intake for international students? Not for MCE. No, there isn't. Our next international intake will be in April next year. I see you've answered that. Thank you very much. I think okay, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll just ask you to, is there anybody who has any questions? Please feel free to ask. I'm quite happy to answer them. Anybody else like to ask any questions? Nothing further?
I've just been asked how to enroll. Yep. So if on our website, can I share my screen, Herbert? Or?
Yes, I'll stop sharing mine.
I'll just do it really quickly.
There we go. Yep.
Thank you. It's actually not. Is it going to let me? So on our website, this is our Master of Contemporary Education. Scroll right down, and if you just here where it says fees and start dates, let's get started. If you push apply now there.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing.
you, Lisa.
I'll put that link in the chat as well.
Great. Any other questions from anybody?
Dr Herbert, just commenting doing part 2 of the study.
Yep.
How many weeks is that, and is it part-time?
Yes, there are part-time options, there are full-time options, but when it comes to part 2 of the MCE, both part-time and full-time are 15 weeks long. The difference, of course, arises in part 3, where if you're part-time, you'll enroll in part 3 will be 44 weeks long, unless it's over Christmas, in which case it's 47 weeks long, including the 3-week break. If you are full-time, then it's 25 weeks long. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
Brilliant. Anybody else?
Apologies, I missed the first 10 minutes because I didn't know the language. In the first 10 minutes, did you explain about the academy scholarships?
Okay, I'm sorry, the sound is really horrible. I didn't quite hear that. Could you just repeat that?
I think Matt spoke of our scholarship, our scholarships.
Yeah, please answer, Lisa.
So Matt, it's there's 4 different types. They're all 50%. So that's 50% of the whole. So if you're applying for the whole journey from part 1, it'd be for the whole journey. Or if you're applying from part 2, that's for part 2 and part 3. So, there is Tangata Whenua, Pacific Ako, Taipeki over 60, and Impact for the intent to do good for the world, people, the planet. So how you apply for those, you apply to enroll with us, but equally at the same time, you apply for a scholarship. You can't apply for a scholarship and not enroll. They don't have anything to attach it to. I hope that helps.
And there's just a question I picked up a little bit on the chat earlier on, where somebody was asking around the extent to which you can get the scholarship, or not to get the scholarship, get the TeachNZ study award, and then split your study over 2 years. That unfortunately is not possible. So if you are awarded a TeachNZ study award, you need to complete that in the calendar year in which you are actually awarded. So let's say, for argument's sake, you get an award for next year. Whatever study you are applying for, you need to complete in that year, meaning next year. Any other questions from anybody?
Yes, you can. So there's a question in regard to the scholarship and the 32-week scholarship and sabbatical. So you're talking, I'm guessing that question's in regard to TeachNZ. Both, I'm guessing if they're both in regard to TeachNZ, TeachNZ have said that you can apply for multiple, put your hat in the ring, and I recommend it. The only thing is, if you win multiple, you can only pick one.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
I think that seems to be everybody, does it? Right, okay. In which case, I think we will close it there for the evening. Thanks very much, everybody, for attending the session. So what will happen from here on in is hopefully you will access the site. You'll begin looking at the applications. If at any point you would like me to have a look at what you've submitted, you won't be able to share the application document with me because it's behind the firewall, of course, but you can share with me, for example, your answers on a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word doc, and I can give you some feedback on that if you like. So if you'd like to send me some of the stuff you've produced, and I can provide you with some, hopefully, useful comments, then please do so. But please don't all leave it until the night of the 29th, because then it's very unlikely that I'll get through all of them. But as you work through those sections and you'd like someone to look at them, you're more than welcome to send them along and I can give you some feedback. So my address, quite simply, is herbert.thomas@academyEX.com. herbert.thomas@academyEX.com. Right. We'll close there for the evening. Thanks very much for attending the session, and good luck. I hope you are successful. Karakia whakakapi. Ka whakairia te tapu. Kia waitia ai te ara. Kia turuki whakatai. Kia turuki whakatai. Omie, huie, tai kie. Keep well, everybody.